Hi, I'm Ken Miller,
And I'm Zach Gaston.
and welcome to the Erdos Miller New Technology Podcast, where we talk about everything drilling technology. Our podcast is sponsored by Gibson Reports. Check them out at gibsonreports.com. They have excellent NWD and directional drilling market share reports. So, Zach, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you.
You're standing in for David today.
That's right.
You're about to have this massive onslaught of MWD nerd words being thrown at you.
I hope I'm ready.
Okay, let's see. And David's up in Calgary today, so I guess he's up for the SBE conference, hopefully learning some good stuff up there, right?
Yeah, in the Great White North.
We have the NWD in the 20s panel coming up at the IADD. I'm going to break the fourth wall again. Shannon, what was the date? 21st and 22nd of October for the IAD. Where is that going to be? Oh, you'll go to the website. Okay, go to the IDD website and look it up. But we'll be talking there, and just the prompt of this has got my brain fired up about like what's going to happen in the next 10 years, right? So there's actually a cool website. I think it's called like Long Bets or something like that, where you can actually make a bet and put it on this website, and there's supposed to be bets for like 10 or plus years, right? And so it's actually like a record that you made the bet. Like I think Bill Gates has some famous bets on this thing.
Really?
Yeah, you should check it out. It's actually really cool. Like, and it's like sometimes it's like the technology titans like betting what's going to happen over like 10 or 20 years, right? And the website I think is so old that some of these have actually panned out, right? So the cool thing about today's podcast is I get to talk about stuff that I think is going to happen in the next 10 years, and I could be totally wrong because no one's going to hold me accountable in 10 years whatsoever, right? So, we'll see if this podcast is still around in 10 years.
I'll set a reminder to listen to this podcast in 10 years.
Okay, well, yeah, just go use the long bets thing, right? So, geeking out about telemetry rates, right? And obviously, telemetry rates are a hot topic today. And that really boils down to like we're talking about like mud pulse telemetry rates and then electromagnetic telemetry rates. Like so, those are the two main telemetries we use. Other stuff really hasn't panned out, right? So that's probably what we're going to keep using over the next 10 years. So what's going to change about that? Well, before we discuss what's going to change, I like to go back and look at what has changed, right? And so I don't think much has changed. I think since like the 80s, a lot of this stuff has been pretty much the same. I think if you were to go back and just extrapolate the curve over the last 30 years, it would be kind of depressing, But we do kind of have this big uptick all of a sudden. In the last 5 years, I think we probably made more progress independently on mud pulse telemetry rates than we have like in the previous 20 years, right?
Do you think that has something to do with patents or?
No, I because I can't really think of anything that's enabling this right now that is the result of a patent expiring, right? Maybe with the exception of the dual transducer decoding methods, because a lot of people are using these methods now where they put two transducers on the site and they use the fact that you're sampling the noise on the mud pumps on one and then the pulses on the other and then canceling it out. That was probably patented by Schlumberger for some period of time. I'm not really sure which patent it was. That one might have expired and enabled that.
So is it just our drilling faster or desire to drilling faster that needs faster telemetry? I mean, if we're going real slow, do you need faster?
Yeah, and that's probably why we didn't really need it, right? When we had slower bits, slower motors, we're making 30 feet an hour. It's more than enough to get 1 gamma point per second, right? That's fine. That's fast enough. Like so maybe there wasn't a huge draw, right? And now we're just losing our minds with some of these ROP rates, right? Like just 400, 600, 800 feet per hour, like just going through these rocks that we used to just slow us down like friggin' butter, right? And so that's really necessitating, one thing that's necessitating faster data is just being able to keep up with those drilling rates. And the other thing is like packing the wells closer together, right? The closer we pack the wells together, the more data we need to make sure that we're not running them into each other, right? And then also the more advanced stuff like, rotary steerables, right? Now I with an NWD and a rotary steerable, I really want to be monitoring inclination and azimuth in real time as the rotary steerable operates, right? I didn't have as much of a need to do that with a motor, although I'm sure some people could go back and argue that you should have. And so that's, I used to only have to send inclination and azimuth in the survey, right? And then all of my logging stuff was just free for tool faces and gamma or whatever else. But now I got to shove that data back in there, right? And then on top of that, we all want great shock and vibe and other drilling dynamics data to help improve the drilling programs on the fly and give feedback to the operators of the rig in real time as to whether or not their BHA is underperforming or they're just driving it too hard from the surface, right? So all these things are like just demanding higher and higher telemetry speeds, right?
Right.
And so I think you've seen, a big uptick in the last, 5 years since I've seen it since 2014, where in 2014, like, we always talk about pulse widths and like 1.0, 0.8 or whatever else, right? Like today we're like people are regularly decoding at a 0.375 or a 0.25 pulse width, when that was 5 years ago just unthinkable. Like that was like the holy grail if you ever got there. And now we've gotten there and we're like, go faster, damn it. Like, hurry up. Go even faster, right?
Yeah, I took that space you gave me and added more data into it, so now I need more space.
Yeah. So, I mean, so somebody said to me one time, like, because we're working on like a wired pipe system, and they said, oh, you know what? This is going to deliver more data than they'll ever need, and this will be the end. And I'm like, no. They're just going to get that, and then they're going to ask for more. Like that. Like when has your home internet connection ever been satisfactory, right?
Yeah.
Like, you always want more data, right? Because, oh, we got cable modems. Well, now I want to download entire friggin' movies. Okay, well, now I need, a gigabit connection, right? Mm-hmm. And then we're going to be delivering them, like, you're going to have increased content requirements and want even faster home internet, right? And so these drilling programs are going to get more complex, and they're going to figure out they can do more stuff in real time, and they're just going to want more and more and more, right? And so, I think just a few things have really changed to enable faster data rates in the last 5 years. One, I think we tried because there was a demand, right? I think we were very risk averse in the past. There's been a really good improvements to the surface decoders as far as filtering and dual transducer decoding. That's been very good. The pulsers, I think, have been made more robust. I think we've always been capable of the speed, but if you were to pulse at a 0.375 and the tool is going to fall apart in 20 or 30 hours, then you probably just weren't going to do it. So, faster data means more actuation of the pulsar, means you're going to be beating up equipment more often. And so you've had to make that equipment take, if you're running at a 0.25 versus a 1.0, that's 4 times as many pulses. Or it could be 2. I'm going to get in trouble for doing math on the air. Anyways, a lot more pulses, right? And so, it's just going to be a lot more harsher on the equipment, right? So I think that we made the pulsars and other things a lot more reliable, and that's allowed us to do it. And then the other thing I think it's made a huge difference is I think that the mud systems have improved significantly in the last 5 years. I think we've got bigger, better pumps. I think we've got cleaner mud, less crap being thrown into it. I think that people are paying a lot more attention to their mud programs and how that's done. And I think that's just made it easier for MudPulse NWD based on, the transmission line being more receptive to the pulses, right? It's just a better transmission line than it used to be, right? So I think all those things kind of explain, roughly where we are today.
What about EM?
EM's kind of in the same spot it's been for the last 10 years, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's, it works where it works, and it doesn't where it doesn't, right? So, with the exception of the downhole antennas, right? Like the biggest thing that's happened with EM in the last 10 years has been the downhole antennas, which are a night and day difference, right? So I've spent all this time talking about, like, how do we get here to where we are today? So what about, I haven't spent any time talking about the next 10 years at all.
Yeah, I guess you haven't.
No. Okay, so let's talk about that.
Let's hear the long bet.
A long bet. Okay, so let's see. Long bet, I think, 2030, I think 10 bit per second mud pulse is commonplace.
How are we going to do it?
Okay. So a couple things. I think we're going to keep pushing positive mud pulse faster and faster, right? We're going to get more sophisticated in the pulsing mechanism. In the filtering mechanisms. Pulses are going to get faster. I don't see any reason you couldn't run at like a 0.1 or whatever else. I mean, you're approaching some hydraulic limit after that, right? But I think that's going to get a lot faster. And I think that's probably what's going to drive the innovation in the first 5 years of the next decade, right? Now, you asked about patents earlier. And one of the big things that's been patented and kind of hold up in these larger, patent, hungry organizations like Schlumberger has been siren pulsers, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think as far as what I've kind of heard and kind of looked at, I think a lot of the patents around siren pulsers are finally expiring, right? I think all that development happened in the 90s. So 20 years, there you go. And so I kind of expect that probably the first siren pulsar skunkwork projects are going to start up in the next couple of years if they haven't already started already. I'm sure there's some group out there somewhere working on a siren pulsar that's going to figure it out. Now, I also think that's a 5-year program to go from prototype to well testing to commercial adoption and really make a big difference, right? So I expect siren pulsars to become kind of available in the last 5 years of the decade, right?
So since I hear about siren pulsars, but I haven't seen a siren pulsar because I've never been a Schlumberger employee.
Yeah.
What is a siren pulsar? Fair
enough, right? So right now we talk a lot about positive mud pulse, right? So what we do is we're pumping fluid through the drill pipe, and then we create an artificial restriction to create a pressure wave and send that to surface, right?
Yeah.
And we just kind of ping it. We go boom, 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 right? We just kind of pulse it, right? And so the big difference between that and a siren pulsar is a siren pulsar is a continuously moving valve, right? And so it's open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close, just constantly, right? And so it's much more akin to like your kind of standard transmitters, where it's actually creating a carrier wave and then creating, fluctuations in that carrier wave to encode data, right? So we're just encoding data in the position of the pulses right now. This would be encoding data in either a frequency shift change or a phase shift key change. And that would allow, it just traditionally has allowed a lot faster data, right? So, I think that there's a really good paper by Schlumberger where they say like the ultimate you could possibly ever do in the transmission line is like 40 bits per second. Like ideal conditions going like 500 feet away, right? Like in a lab, right? Like that's the best you'll ever do, right?
That's way faster than I would have guessed.
Oh well, it's actually pretty interesting, right? Because I think the same paper also says that the upper frequency for electromagnetic that could ever be possible, with the existing formations is like 20 hertz, right? And 20 bits per second. And so there is some theory out there that mud pulse could ultimately be faster than EM, although I'm not sure practically that's going to work out. But yeah, it's actually really fast, right? And so a lot of the siren pulsars in pretty nominal commercial conditions are pulling off 10 to 20 to 30 bits per second commercially today, but they're all in these big organizations. They're offshore. They're on a drill ship with a triple quad combo or whatever else where you really need that data, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Earlier you're saying you're adding the wave and it's a continuous wave.
Yep.
Okay. Is it a valve that's opening and closing continuously and you speed it up or slow it down? Or is it like the motor style where maybe you're spinning it up faster or slower or something?
Well, so that's an interesting question. The commercial ones that exist are shear valves, right?
Okay.
So they're like a continuously spinning kind of valve, and it's opening and closing, and it's just shearing the flow, right? There is a lot of just discussion, like what if that could you just use a positive mud pulsar in a siren-like fashion if you just open and closed it in a continuous pattern as opposed to doing this pulsing, right? I think some people played around with that, right? And then Schlumberger actually on one of their systems is able to pull off a quadrature phase shift keying on a positive mud pulsar, which is twice as fast as your typical, tensor style, MRE NWD, right?
Quadrature phase shift keying or QPSK is what we use for EM.
It is, yeah. But I mean, it's also used in a ton of transmission lines, right? So that's a common encoding method for EM, not so common on mud pulse, but it seems like it can work, right? So super nerdy, right? But I expect, us to hit kind of 5 bits per second in the next 5 years and then upwards of 10 or 20 bits per second commercially available in 2030, right?
You hear that?
Yeah. So let's talk about the EM side of things, right?
Okay.
So one of the things I expect is what's not going to happen is we're not going to have a fundamental shift in how the Earth behaves, right? Like still going to be rock, still going to be shale, it's still going to be, unless all the drilling goes back to Pennsylvania, we're still going to be stuck with formations that kind of work for EM and kind of don't, right?
Yeah, salt domes.
Yeah. And so there's also a really good argument that since the EM power falls off with a cube law, cube law to the third power, right? That trying to right now we use like 20 to 30 watts to transmit EM, right? So transmitting at 100 watts, 200 watts, 300 watts, 3,000 watts is a massive diminishing return, right? Like you almost have to go from 30 watts to 3,000 watts to even get anything useful out of it, right? And so obviously generating 3,000 watts downhole ain't gonna happen.
Right.
Like you'd have to have like an entire mud motor hooked up to a generator to then pump out that amount of power. Like it's just shocking amount of power, right?
Unless we can come up with a downhole welder.
Something like that, right? Yeah, something crazy. And so, but what I do expect is I do expect a ton of innovation in the antenna technology, right? So, I mean, people playing around with the downhole antennas. I expect people to find more ways to basically get that same functionality. The repeater systems might become economical. I know some people are working on like EM repeaters to where the EM only has to go halfway up and then it gets repeated up. Downside of that is it cuts the bandwidth in half every time you put a repeater in there. But it could work commercially. But I expect a lot of antenna technology to really improve in the next 10 years. And so I think that you might have a standard, in 10 years, a standard electromagnetic job that is pulling off also 10 or 20 bits per second, right? Now, the other thing I expect is I expect the antenna technology to get so good that it doesn't really matter where you run EM. Like we might be able to overcome the inherent problems in the formations and just with better antennas, make every formation really viable and capable of carrying 10 or 20 bits per second EM, right? Mm-hmm. Which I think is going to make a huge, it's going to mean that dual telemetry systems are going to play a huge part in the next 10 years, right? I expect that market share and the demand for those tools to go nowhere but up because, as they manufacture more of them, costs should come down, and then viability of those systems with the new antenna technologies should really go there, right? And if you have a dual telemetry system that's just as reliable as a mud pulse or close to it, and then if it has the backup telemetry, I just don't see how you're going to justify like not having that in the whole, right? Like if it's double the cost, double the half the reliability, that's never going to happen, right?
Right.
But if it's always more parts. So if you can get the reliability to within 5 or 10%, and then you can get the cost to only like 10 or 20, 30% more, then I think those are going to have a lot more market share, right? And so what we might look at in the future is a 2030, we might have a system that's using both telemetries capable of either mud pulse or dual telemetry operation in the 10 to 20 bit per second range, or both upwards of like 50 bits per second. Like that might happen, right? Like this long bet is very aggressive right now. I'm really painting myself into a corner, right?
No, it's okay. I'll take the under, maybe.
Yep. Okay. I think you're almost guaranteed to win if you take the under. Like I am being very aggressive in this. I think you'd be totally nuts to take the over, right?
Maybe that's where the payoff is, going over.
I think if you go over, then what's going to happen is that somebody's going to find a way to deliver wired pipe reliably and economically to the mass market, right? Like that's the only thing I see in 10 years, right, that could really make that over situation just work out, right? Which would be great. Like if we could actually figure out how to do that, people often ask me like, Ken, aren't you worried about wired pipe because, wouldn't that put mud pulse and dual, electromagnetic or dual telemetry out of business? And I say no, because all that means is that the transmission line is going to change from mud to the wired pipe, and then it's just going to be a battle to see who can get the most amount of data on the wire.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I can do 100,000 bits per second on the wire. Well, I can do 200,000 bits per second on the wire because I've got better encoding or, signal detection or whatever else for your wire signals, right?
I imagine you'll probably still need short hops and stuff like that because you don't want everything to be wired pipe, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it might make sense to like short hop data back to like a wired point collection point at the top of the BHA and then send all that back, right?
Yeah.
So,
or only do, maybe look with your downhole antenna, you mix it in with the wired pipe down to
certain amount, and then
the curve.
Yeah.
You only EM through the lateral back to the pipe.
Could happen, right?
I don't know.
So, how did you survive my nerd onslaught of telemetry language?
I think I survived.
Okay, good. So long bet is 2030. And, mud pulse systems operating reliably at 10 bits per second, right? I would say EM systems operating upwards of 20 bits per second, and then dual telemetry systems operating somewhere around 30 bits per second, right? So plus or minus, whatever, right? And you're going to take the under, right?
It depends on what the plus or minus whatever is.
Sorry, what?
You said plus or minus whatever.
I can't give you too broad of a band there, right? Like I'll just fix my numbers right there. So mud pulse 10, EM 20, dual telemetry 30, right?
If you do that, then you could bet the over and then also bet on yourself and make it happen. And
there
then
you go.
You'll get your money back.
We're gonna go find this website and we're gonna put it on there, and it's gonna be Zach and Ken, and we're gonna see what happens in 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all I wanted to, ramble on about today. Thank you for joining us for the podcast. I'm Ken Miller.
And I'm Zach Gaston.
And once again, check out our sponsor, Gibson Reports, at gibsonreports.com for excellent NWD and directional drilling market share reports. And thanks for joining us.
Yep. Like and subscribe.